On the morning of March 3rd, 1865, Mary Ann Milne prepared breakfast for her husband and his elderly aunt in their Edinburgh tenement. By noon, both were vomiting blood. The doctor recorded gastric fever. 3 days later, the aunt was dead. The chemist's analysis revealed a different cause. The coroner's inquest papers, preserved in the city archives, document the investigation that followed. The first-floor flat at 17 St. Leonard's Lane measured 22 feet by 18, its 2 rooms connected by a narrow passageway to a shared stair. At 7 o'clock on that Friday morning, Mary Ann Milne, aged 34, lit the coal-fired range in the cramped kitchen, its iron surface still cold from the night. She prepared a pot of porridge using oats purchased the previous day from the chandler on South Back Canongate. The morning was clear, but bitterly cold, a northeast wind rattling the single-pane window above the sink. She served the meal in 2 blue and white striped bowls at 7:30, carrying them into the adjoining room where her husband David, a clerk at the Leith Docks, and his aunt Agnes Caldwell, aged 71, sat at a small deal table. Witness statements taken later would note that Mary Ann took no portion for herself, claiming she had broken her fast earlier. By 8:15, David Milne complained of a burning sensation in his throat and stomach. His aunt described a similar discomfort, though she attributed it to her chronic indigestion. By 9 o'clock, both were experiencing violent retching. Mary Ann sent a neighbour's boy, Thomas Reed, aged 12, to fetch Dr. James MacLeod from his surgery on Holyrood Road. The doctor arrived at 10:20, his boots tracking melting slush onto the floorboards. He noted pallor, rapid pulse, and abdominal tenderness in both patients. He diagnosed gastric fever, prescribed rest and sips of barley water, and departed. The vomiting continued throughout the day. At 4 in the afternoon, Mary Ann was observed by another tenant, Elspeth Grant, emptying a chamber pot into the common privy in the back court. The contents, Grant would later testify, were dark and streaked with blood. Night fell. The wind shifted, bringing a sleety rain that tapped against the window glass. David Milne's condition stabilized somewhat by midnight, but Agnes Caldwell's worsened. Her breathing became labored, a rattling sound audible from the passage. At 2:17 on Saturday morning, according to the statement of Mary Ann Milne, recorded by the police sergeant, Agnes Caldwell ceased breathing. The body lay in the bed for 5 hours before David, weak but ambulatory, insisted on summoning the doctor once more. Dr. MacLeod returned at 7:45, examined the body, and noted the absence of fever rash. He declined to issue a death certificate, citing the suddenness of the demise and the concurrent illness of the husband. At 9 o'clock, he informed the parish inspector of his concerns. The inspector, Alexander Muir, arrived at 10, viewed the body, and dispatched a messenger to the Crown Office. By 11, the Procurator Fiscal had ordered the removal of the body to the Royal Infirmary mortuary for a post-mortem examination. 2 constables carried the remains, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, down the narrow stair and into a waiting wagon. Mary Ann Milne stood in the doorway, her hands clasped at her waist, watching the wagon turn onto the main road. She was asked to accompany the constables to the police office on the High Street to give a preliminary statement. She gathered her shawl, a grey woolen garment with frayed edges, and followed without protest. The household economy, as later detailed in the Fiscal's report, was precarious. David Milne earned 24 shillings a week. His aunt Agnes received a small annuity of £5 per quarter from her late husband's estate, paid directly to her and recorded in the ledger of the Scottish Widows' Fund. Rent for the flat was 6 shillings weekly, due every Friday. A ledger entry from a pawnbroker on the Cowgate, dated February 27th, showed Mary Ann Milne had pledged a silver brooch for 12 shillings. The investigation commenced at the infirmary mortuary at 1 o'clock that Saturday afternoon. The room was 15 feet square, tiled in white ceramic with a central slate table. The air carried the sharp scent of carbolic acid overlaying the underlying odor of decay. Dr. MacLeod performed the post-mortem in the presence of Dr. Henry Forbes, the police surgeon. The external examination noted no signs of violence. The body of Agnes Caldwell was opened. The stomach and its contents, approximately 8 ounces of partially digested porridge, were carefully removed and placed into 2 clean glass jars provided by the chemist. The jar seals were stamped with the fiscal's office mark. The mucous membrane of the stomach was noted as highly inflamed, with several patches of corrosion. The intestines showed similar irritation. The liver and kidneys appeared congested. Samples of these organs, along with a section of the stomach wall, were placed in separate jars. The entire process was documented by a clerk who noted the time of each step. The jars were sealed with wax, labelled and placed into a wooden lockbox by Constable John Gray. At 3:15, Constable Gray transported the box via cab to the laboratory of Professor Angus McKinnon, lecturer in chemistry at the University of Edinburgh, on South Bridge. Professor McKinnon's assistant signed a chain of custody ledger upon receipt. The analysis would not begin until Monday morning. Meanwhile, at the flat on St. Leonard's Lane, Fiscal's officer Robert Sim and 2 constables conducted a search beginning at 4 o'clock. The search inventory, later entered as evidence, listed 1 tin of oatmeal half full, a small paper packet containing a white powder found at the back of a cupboard shelf behind a stack of plates, an empty blue glass bottle with a cork stopper located beneath the kitchen sink, a pestle and mortar with traces of white residue, and a household account book. Each item was wrapped in brown paper, sealed and labelled. The white powder and the bottle were given directly to Professor McKinnon at 6 o'clock. On Monday, March 6th, at 9 in the morning, Professor McKinnon began the Marsh Test. He prepared the apparatus, a glass flask, a drying tube, and a heated porcelain tube. A portion of the stomach contents was treated with sulfuric acid and zinc, producing a gas. This gas was passed through the heated tube. A metallic mirror deposit formed. He repeated the test with the white powder from the packet. The same result. He quantified the amount found in the stomach contents using standard gravimetric analysis. He completed his certificate at 4 in the afternoon. The certificate stated the stomach contents contained 42 grains of arsenic trioxide. The white powder was pure arsenic. The amount recovered from the stomach was sufficient to cause death in an adult. Arsenic. Sufficient for a fatal dose. Fiscal's officer Sim presented the chemist's certificate to the sheriff at 5:30. A warrant for the arrest of Mary Ann Milne on suspicion of murder was issued at 6 o'clock. She was taken from the flat, where she had remained under informal watch. The arrest was conducted quietly. She asked only one question of Officer Sim, her voice low. "What will become of my things?" She was conveyed to the Calton Gaol in a closed carriage. The turnkey's register records her admission at 7:22 that evening. The committal hearing took place in the Sheriff's Court on George IV Bridge on March 10th. The room was panelled in dark oak, the bench elevated 3 steps above the floor. Sheriff William Menzies presided. The air was thick with the smell of damp wool and lamp oil. The fiscal presented the evidence in summary: the chemist's certificate, the post-mortem findings, the packet of powder and bottle from the search. The testimony of Dr. MacLeod and Dr. Forbes was read into the record by the clerk. The neighbour, Elspeth Grant, gave evidence in person, stating she had seen Mary Ann with the chamber pot. The boy, Thomas Reed, confirmed he was sent for the doctor. David Milne, pale and leaning on a stick, testified that he had been ill but was recovering and that his wife had prepared the meal. He stated he knew of no reason she would wish harm to his aunt. Under questioning from the fiscal, he confirmed his aunt's annuity was paid to her and that the household finances were sometimes strained at the end of the quarter. Mary Ann Milne, dressed in the same grey shawl over a brown dress, stood in the dock, her hands resting on the railing. She was asked if she wished to say anything. She shook her head. The sheriff found sufficient evidence to commit her for trial on the charge of murder. She was formally remanded to the Calton Gaol to await the next sitting of the High Court of Justiciary. The witnesses were bound over. The procedure concluded in 40 minutes. The public gallery, containing a dozen spectators, emptied quietly. Over the following weeks, the case was prepared for trial. The Crown Counsel, Advocate Deputy Charles Rankine, compiled the indictment. The defence counsel, appointed by the court, was a young advocate named George Innes. He visited his client in the jail on March 15th and again on March 22nd. Their conversations are not recorded. The case appeared in brief paragraphs in The Scotsman and the Edinburgh Evening Current, noting the charge and the committal. No editorial comment was published. The physical evidence, the jars, the powder, the bottle, was stored in a locked cabinet at the Crown Office, its seal inspected weekly and logged. The trial was scheduled for the spring circuit, beginning April 24th. The prison bell tolled the hours, marking the passage of 37 days between committal and trial. The courtroom fell silent, save for the scratch of the clerk's pen on parchment, as the committal order was signed. The women's wing of the Calton Gaol was a 3-story block of grey sandstone, built 20 years prior. Mary Ann Milne's cell was on the 2nd floor, cell number 14. It measured 9 feet in length, 6 feet in width, and 11 feet to the ceiling. The walls were lime-washed a dull yellow, streaked with condensation. The floor was flagstone, cold to the touch even in April. A high, barred window, 12 inches by 8, faced northwest, offering a sliver of sky and the upper bricks of a facing wall. Furnishings consisted of an iron bedstead bolted to the floor, its mattress filled with coir, a single coarse wool blanket, a small wooden stool, and a tin chamber pot. A Bible provided by the prison lay on the stool. The cell door was solid oak, reinforced with iron straps, with a grated inspection hatch at eye level. The daily routine commenced at 6 o'clock with the ringing of a bell along the corridor. The hatch would slide open, and a wardress would look in. Breakfast, delivered at 6:30, was a pint of oatmeal porridge and a 6-ounce piece of bread, served on a tin plate. The porridge was unsalted, the bread stale. Dinner came at noon, a pint of soup, usually a thin broth of barley and turnip, and another 6 ounces of bread. Supper at 5 o'clock was a repetition of breakfast. The food was passed through a low slot in the door. The prisoner was allowed 1 hour of exercise daily in a walled yard 20 feet square, always alone. The wardress on duty during this period, Margaret Kinnear, noted in her log that the prisoner walked slowly, always keeping to the perimeter, her head bowed. She never spoke unless spoken to. The prison chaplain, Reverend Thomas Aird, visited every Tuesday and Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. He would stand just inside the cell door, his prayer book in hand. He read psalms. He asked if she wished to pray. She usually remained silent, but on one occasion, recorded in the chaplain's journal, she asked a question. Her voice was barely audible. "Will they let me see my children before?" She had 2 children, boys aged 8 and 10, who were in the care of her sister in Leith. The chaplain said he would inquire. The prison surgeon, Dr. Wallace, examined her weekly. He noted her weight, which decreased from 118 pounds to 112 over 4 weeks. He recorded her pulse and respiration as normal. He asked about her sleep. She reported little. The sounds of the prison were constant, the tread of the wardress's boots on the stone flags every half hour as she passed the cell doors, the clang of distant gates, the murmur of other prisoners, indistinct through the walls, the occasional cough echoing in the corridor. At night, the The darkness was absolute, save for a faint glow from a gas lamp in the passage filtering through the grate. The cold seeped from the stones. On April 10th, Advocate George Innes visited for a third time. They spoke for 40 minutes. He explained the trial procedure. He discussed the evidence against her, specifically the chemist's findings. He asked about the packet of powder. Her response, as he later noted in his trial papers, was that she kept it for killing rats, which infested the building's lower storage cellar. She said she had purchased it from an apothecary's boy on the Canongate months before, but could not recall the shop. Innes requested she write down the names of any character witnesses. She wrote 3 names on a sheet of paper provided by the wardress: her sister Jean, the minister from her childhood parish in Fife, and a former employer, a Mrs. Arbuthnot of Newington. The pen nib scratched loudly in the quiet cell. Her handwriting, Innes noted, was careful and clear. After he left, the wardress observed her sitting on the stool for a long time, looking at the small square of sky in the window. She took her supper bread, but left the porridge untouched. The wardress's log for that night records, "Prisoner quiet, heard weeping at approx. 11 p.m. Coal smoke seeped through stone vents, mixing with the dampness and the faint odour of carbolic from the weekly scrubbing of the floors." The High Court of Justiciary convened in Parliament House on April 24, 1865. The courtroom was a vast wood-panelled hall with a vaulted ceiling. The bench, draped in red, was occupied by Lord Justice Clerk John Inglis. The jury of 15 men, shopkeepers, farmers, a schoolmaster, were sworn in at 10 o'clock. The indictment was read by the clerk. Mary Ann Milne pleaded "not guilty" in a voice that did not carry beyond the dock. Advocate Deputy Charles Rankine opened for the Crown. He outlined the case: the meal, the sudden illness, the death, the discovery of arsenic, the motive of financial relief from the aunt's annuity. The first witness was Dr. James MacLeod. He described his visits, his initial diagnosis, and his subsequent doubts. Under cross-examination by Innes, he conceded that the symptoms of gastric fever and arsenic poisoning could be similar in early stages. Dr. Henry Forbes testified next, detailing the post-mortem findings and the inflamed stomach. Professor Angus McKinnon was called. He carried his apparatus into the courtroom and demonstrated the Marsh Test for the jury using a sample of pure arsenic, producing the characteristic metallic mirror. He then stated his findings from the analysis of the stomach contents and the white powder. His testimony was precise. The Marsh Test revealed arsenic in fatal quantity. I recovered 42 grains from the stomach contents. Half a grain can cause illness. 2 grains can be fatal. The jury foreman leaned forward to observe the glass tube. The packet of powder and the blue bottle were presented as exhibits, passed among the jurors. The neighbour, Elspeth Grant, took the stand. She described seeing the accused with the chamber pot. "The contents were dark, sir. Unnatural." Under cross-examination, she admitted she did not see the accused put anything into the food. The boy, Thomas Reed, confirmed the timeline. David Milne testified, his voice weak. He confirmed his wife prepared the food, that she did not eat it, and that his aunt handled her own finances. When asked by the advocate deputy if his wife had ever expressed resentment toward his aunt, he paused for 3 seconds, the pause recorded in the transcript. "No, sir, not that I heard." George Innes rose for the defense. He called no witnesses to the facts. Instead, he gave a speech to the jury. He argued there was no direct evidence of administration. The arsenic in the house, he contended, was for rats, a common household substance. He suggested the aunt, in her elderly confusion, might have taken the powder herself, mistaking it for a remedy. He pointed to the lack of proven motive. The annuity, he noted, would have ceased with the aunt's death, not passed to the Milnes. In his closing, the advocate depute dismissed this, Arguing control of the household budget was motive enough, Lord Inglis charged the jury at 3:40 in the afternoon. His instructions were measured. He explained the law of circumstantial evidence. He told them they must be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the accused administered the poison with intent to kill. The jury retired at 4 o'clock. The courtroom emptied, save for the accused, her counsel, the court officers, and a handful of spectators. The sound of rain against the tall windows filled the silence. The jury returned at 25 minutes past 5. Their faces gave no indication. The clerk asked for the verdict. The foreman, a grocer from Portobello, stood. His voice was firm. Guilty. A murmur passed through the room. Lord Inglis asked if the prisoner had anything to say before sentence was passed. Mary Ann Milne shook her head, her hands gripping the dock railing, her knuckles white. The judge assumed the black cap. He pronounced sentence according to the form. His words were formulaic, his tone flat. You shall be taken from this place to the Calton Gaol, and from there to a place of execution, and there be hanged by the neck until you are dead. Death. The court officer touched her arm. She did not move for a moment, then turned and descended the stairs to the cells below. The scratch of the clerk's pen recorded the sentence in the minute book. The condemned cell was larger than her previous one, 12 feet square, on the ground floor of the prison near the execution shed. A fire was allowed in the small grate. A wardress and a matron were in constant attendance from the moment of her return from court on April 24th. Reverend Aird visited daily. On April 26th, her sister Jean was permitted a final visit of 15 minutes. The wardress present recorded that they spoke in low tones, mostly about the children. Mary Ann gave her sister a small linen handkerchief she had embroidered with a simple flower pattern during her weeks in the first cell. The execution was set for 8 o'clock on the morning of May 2nd. She was woken at 6. The morning was overcast, a fine drizzle misting the high prison walls. She was dressed in a plain calico gown provided by the prison, over which a loose white shift was placed. Her hair was braided and pinned close to her head. She took a little tea. At 7:30, the governor of the jail, the sheriff, the surgeon, and the chaplain entered the cell. The governor asked if she had any final statement. She shook her head. Reverend Aird read from the scripture. At 7:50, the procession formed. She walked between two wardresses, the chaplain ahead, reading the service for the dead. The route from the cell to the execution shed was 50 yards along a covered stone passage, then across an open courtyard of 18 paces. The drizzle had ceased, leaving the cobbles slick and dark. The execution shed was a brick structure with a slated roof built against the outer wall. Inside, the scaffold dominated the space. The trapdoor mechanism, operated by a lever, was tested the previous evening. Present in the shed, as recorded in the sheriff's list, were the governor, the sheriff substitute, the prison surgeon Dr. Wallace, the chaplain, the executioner William Calcraft, brought from London, 4 wardresses, and 6 newspaper representatives. No public spectators were allowed. The prisoner mounted the 4 wooden steps to the platform with steady steps, assisted by the wardresses. Calcraft adjusted the noose, a coarse hemp rope, around her neck. The white cap was drawn over her face. The chaplain concluded the prayer. "Deliver us from evil. Amen." Calcraft moved to the lever. The sheriff substitute nodded. The lever was pulled at 8 o'clock precisely. The trapdoors fell with a heavy wooden crash. The body dropped 6 feet. There was a brief silence, then the sound of the rope creaking under the weight. The surgeon stepped forward, watch in hand. He monitored the pulse at the wrist, then placed a mirror before the mouth and nose. He noted no clouding. He listened for a heartbeat with his ear to the chest. At 8:02, he pronounced life extinct. 7:58. The body was left suspended for the customary hour. At 9 o'clock, it was lowered into a plain deal coffin that had been placed beneath the trap. The coffin lid was nailed shut, The prison bell, which had begun tolling at 8 and continued at 1-minute intervals, fell silent. The death certificate was completed by Dr. Wallace, citing judicial hanging as the cause. The coffin was transported by prison cart to the grounds of the Edinburgh University Medical School, as was the practice for executed criminals for anatomical dissection. The receipt for the body was signed by the Professor of Anatomy at 10:15. The trial record, along with the chemist's certificate, the post-mortem report, and the indictment, was bound in vellum and deposited in the High Court archives, reference HCJ 1865-87. The pawnbroker's ledger entry for the silver brooch was filed separately. No one witnessed the purchase of the arsenic. The apothecary's boy, when questioned again after the trial, said he could not remember serving her, nor could he swear he had not.